Welcome to the IMPRINT YouTube training channel. My name is Tommy and I've got the great pleasure of serving at IMPRINT. As you know, IMPRINT exists to leave a healthy mark on the ever-growing church in Africa, providing trustworthy biblical resources and training to churches. Now, last week we looked at what church membership looks like. Today, on our last session, I'd like for us to look at how we as church members should submit to one another for the church. I know that the word submit sometimes scare people. I hear people say that the word reminds them of slavery or people abusing their power. Even though that's true in the world, it shouldn't be true in the church. So I'd like for us to look at what God desired to be of submission. So God gave submission to the church for our own welfare and safety. Now let's look at what it means to submit to a church and why it is good for us to submit to one another. We all know that a light, a flashlight or a lamp seems brighter the darker it is around it, right? Now that is what we as believers are called to do. The world is dark and we are brighter in how we serve the Lord. Paul tells the believers in Philippi to be a sign together as they live their lives together. Their lives must be worthy of the gospel, the light. They must be of one spirit and have the same love towards one another. They should value one another above each other, putting one above yourself. Now this picture is a picture of unity, right? It's a picture of mutual submission. And this is important to hear. It's mutual submission. It's not the mass submitting to one person, but everyone to one another. I submit to you, you submit to me, we submit to each other. It's a life worthy of the gospel. As we grow in the gospel, as we love the gospel, we want to serve one another, right? As Christ served us. Jesus submitted himself to God the Father as he came to serve. Lehman says on page 95, he says, Christ submitted his whole life for our good. We should live this gospel life of submitting to Jesus' bride, the church, and through this we submit to him. We are in him and he is in us. A life worthy of the gospel is a life that submits to one another. Jonathan again helpfully points us to 8 ways of submitting to a local church individually. So as an individual, this is how we submit to a local church, and as a church submits to us, so we mutually submitting. So first of all, we should submit publicly. This is a formal step towards membership with a local body of believers. Jesus identified publicly with his church, and so should we. We should identify ourselves and become members of a local church. Number 2, we need to submit physically or geographically. That means we submit by regularly gathering with our fellow believers. Hebrews tells us, do not neglect the gathering of the saints. So physically, we gather with a local church. Number 3, socially. We need to submit socially. Churches, and Lehman talks about this, he says, churches should be more than social clubs, but they should not be less. And we need to spend time together, right? Building into each other's lives, discipling one another, so that we can imitate each other and imitate Christ through that. Number 3, we should submit affectionately. That's number 4. Affection is best described in 1 Corinthians 12, verses 25 to 26. So you can read that. I think it's in our scripture verses later on. But when one part suffer, all suffer. When one part rejoices, all rejoice. Also in Romans 12, verse 10, devote to one another in love and honor one another. We should value others above ourselves. It's all about the brother or sister next to you. Number 5, we should submit financially. This will not always look the same in each church, but we should always look after the Lord's people who are in need, or pay double honor to the pastor that teaches us. That's 1 Timothy 5. We need to look after the practical needs of the church, and especially the person that preaches, as I said, preaching the gospel, nothing else. So it's not for his gain, but we look after the people that preaches and teaches us because they equip us, Ephesians, for the ministry to each other. Number 6, we should submit vocationally. Our jobs do not come first. Our church life does. Even if it means you need to turn down a job because there is not a church there. So if you get a promotion and they move you to a different city or town and you don't know of a good church there, then decline the promotion and stay in your church. We need to join or submit to each other. Number 7, we should submit ethically. We should all look to our churches to instruct us how to live our lives morally. What does the Bible teach about abortion or government or drinking or murder? You get the point. That is through the local church and the teaching through the Bible that we submit about these moral or ethical issues. And number 8, we need to submit spiritually. We should exercise our spiritual gifts in the church. We need to disciple one another into a spiritual maturity. We should pray for and with one another. That is submitting spiritually. And then we should also sit under the teaching of the word. We should help people submit through our love to one another. And we need to, however, recognize that there are people that take advantage of this. So those 8 points are beautifully scripture-based, that this is how you submit to one another, to a local church who are the believers. But again, like I said, we need to recognize that some people do take advantage of this submission, making people serve them instead of the body. Now, when should we not submit? And here's a couple of practical identification marks of you need to be careful if a leader in the church does all these things. It might be an abuse of leadership. So if the leadership does not promote these 8 things that I've said and that Lehman helps us with, then we need to be cautious and maybe think of, should I find another church? And the first thing about abusive leadership is when the leadership makes laws when the Bible is silent, saying, you have to do this. Well, is that from the Bible? No, but we say you have to do this. Then you need to be cautious. Or rely on their own personalities or play on your guilt instead of the word showing you the gospel. Or showing favoritism. Or punishing those that are in disagreement. Threatening people. Always showing off their good deeds instead of pointing you to Scripture. Hardly ever encouraging the church. And being very suspicious of everyone. Now, those are clear identification marks of abusive leadership. And then you might think and start looking for another church. And if you can't find another church, please contact us. We have a list of and a network of good churches that we can point you to. So reach out to us. So we have seen that we should submit to a local church. And then we also saw that we need to be wise when we submit. That's all good things to consider as you grow in your local church and as you submit mutually to one another. Now, here are some questions that we can think about. Number 1, why should we submit to a local church? Number 2, what are some of the advantages of submitting to a local church? Number 3, how do we mutually submit to one another? And number 4, what are some of the warning signs of an abusive leadership? So those are some good questions. If you have other questions, please ask them and leave them in the comment section below that we can have a good discussion about that. Here are some scripture verses. And the first one is Philippians 2 verses 15. Philippians 2 verses 27 up to chapter 2 verses 2. Hebrews 10:25. 1 Corinthians 16:2. And James 4 verse 4. Now those are just some scripture verses to get your brain thinking, but go think about how you can submit to a local church. Remember to click the subscribe button. Also, you can find us on Facebook at Imprint On, or our website, imprinton.org, and our podcast, Imprint Out Loud. If you know of others that would find these videos helpful or beneficial, please share it with them. If you have any questions or comments regarding what we spoke about today, leave us a comment below. Well, I'm signing off till next time. Take action, read, and learn.